Okay.
Right. So our topic is Jetpack Compose. Is it as good as the hype? Converting an existing screen to use Jetpack Compose. So I have to put a caveat in here. Charles and I are not experts. Compose came into beta. We've been looking at it out of the corner of our eye. And then when it came out in beta, we grabbed it and we thought, let's see what we can do. So who are we? I am an Android engineer at Luno, and Charles is an Android engineer at Luno as well. And there are our credentials. Okay. Yeah. So what did we want to do? We heard that Jetpack Compose is a good interoperability story, and Nick has told us about that. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to take an existing screen in the Luno app, and then we wanted to see if we can replace it with Jetpack Compose. That's exactly what Nick suggested one does. And so we thought, well, let's try that. So the Luno app, for people who don't know, it's a cryptocurrency wallet. You can see the home screen on the right-hand side there. And we have lots of layouts and lots of fragments. I just did a file count. We have 176 fragment layout files, and we've got 336 layout files. I couldn't actually even figure out which parts were views and which parts were what was happening there, but we have a lot of views. So the view that we decided to pick was a relatively simple one. It's the transaction detail view. So that's if you're in your wallet and there is a transaction, you tap on the transaction, you get some detailed information about this transaction view. So to just give you a little bit of background, what our architecture looks like. So we have an activity, usually it's a single activity. Then we have fragments that appear in this activity. And we've built our app such that there's a view model with layout. And we connect our view model and our layout together with data binding. And then the view model gets the data from either the database or the network with the repository pattern. So from the architecture point of view, we've already got this, what they call unidirectional data flow. We've already got this thing where there's a state that passes state information to the UI and events coming back. So that unidirectional data flow, we do at the moment inside the old view system using XML and data binding. Click, Charles.
Okay.
So what we want is to replace that XML part and that state and UI update with Compose. Okay. So if I'm following the code labs and the instructions on the site, I'm not going to go into the details. You can read the details yourself, but there are things that you need to update in your build system. So one of the things there is use IR has to be true, and the Compose version you have to set, and the Kotlin version you have to set. So we did all of this, and then everything broke. We had out of memory errors. Well, first of all, you need to have the newest IDE, which was fine. That was an easy thing to fix, but we had out of memory errors. We had some things that were there that we needed to remove. And the most problematic thing was that you can see that error, that last error on the last line. It gives me an exception during IR lowering, which sounds really weird. But what that basically means, it's somewhere in the latest version of Kotlin, there's an internal representation of Kotlin before it goes to the JVM, and it got muddled. And that was really just not anything to do with Compose, but it's just us having to update our project. So at this point, Charles and I got a little bit anxious and thought, well, we already spent about 5 hours on this. We're not going to have anything to demo. So what we thought we'd do, we just take what we want to do inside a Hello World app and just play with the UI first. So the strategy. So reading the interoperability guide, you can do one of three things. You can say that all new views in your app are going to be built in Compose. That's one approach to take. The other way to do it is you're going to say, okay, we can take small pieces. Let's take this component or that component or this part of a screen or that part of a screen. We'll convert these small parts to Compose all over the app, and then slowly but surely get the whole app into Compose. Or you can say, take a screen and do it on a screen by screen basis. But whatever strategy you choose, if you have a big app like Luno, you're going to have old code and new code living side by side. There is no way to escape that. Next slide. So I just want to mention themes. We all know about the XML themes, and I won't put any expletives in there, but the XML themes were very difficult to organize and sort out. You got muddled really easily. In Compose, you have this Compose theme. Nick has shown us this detail. And what you need for a Compose theme is you need typography, shapes, and content. And the interoperability story gives you, we've seen now from Nick's talk, 2 potential libraries where you can pull things in from your XML into your Compose theme. So if you have old and new in your system, you're going to have an old set of themes and you're going to have the Compose themes. You can only pull in the colors, the typography, and the shapes. You can't pull the other messy bits, which in my eye is a good thing because you don't want to replicate all of the complications. And also the Compose views lend themselves to formatting and organizing things with modifiers rather than all sorts of strange XML styles. So another thing to mention, if we're going to have old systems and new systems, Nick also showed us a bit of this. You can have your old XML view and then you can drop a Compose view into that so that you can put, so if you're going for the option where bits and pieces of the app are going to be updated, you could potentially do it in this way. Or if you're going for the option where you've got a whole screen that you're updating, and then if, like Mira asked, you have maybe a custom view like that little status open at the right-hand side, there is a cute little custom view we've got in the Luno app. You could potentially drop that custom view into an Android view inside your Compose tree. But I learned today now that it's going to be quite easy for me to, with a canvas composable, just draw that little circle and that little pie chart in a custom view. Okay, next slide. So now I'm going to hand over to Charles to tell you how he built the screen.
Okay, so you've decided that you're going to build a screen in Compose. And then in Compose, as we've already heard, we deal with functions and not actual view objects. So in other words, every screen that you build will start out as a function. And here are some characteristics of such functions. They have to be pure, as in they should have no side effects. Things like setting a global variable can throw your screen off, so you don't want to do that. And so these functions essentially just describe what your screen should look like and not how it should be laid out, because that is taken care of by Compose. And your functions, they can take state and expose events so that you can react to what your user does on your screen. And now, if we compare this with the old way of building screens, I mean, you would create a layout, a XML file, which basically is a tree of your view objects, and this tree is inflated at your activity or fragment creation time, and then at which point you have access to set state and also handle interactions the way you see fit. And with Compose, your state and your interaction handles are actually parameters into your functions. And essentially, as it was mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you build your screen in small pieces. You don't want huge functions and all that. And then the good thing with the Compose is that each composable can actually get executed only based on the state that it provides. So if an update happens and there's nothing to update for a specific composable, then there is nothing to run in that case. So recomposition doesn't happen. So there's some efficiency in there. And so let's look again at the screen that we set out to convert to Compose. It's our transaction details screen. And as you can see on the left is what it looks like in the app. And in our Hello World project, we built out the right portion. So I'll just switch over quickly to Android Studios to show you just a bit of it. Okay. So if we go here. Okay. So as you can see here in Android Studio, we've plugged this screen into an activity, and well, it's within the set content function that we mentioned earlier. And our screen starts out as this composable function called detail screen, and we've made use of another composable function that's predefined called scaffold. Basically sets up your screen. And then for the actual content of our screen, we have this additional composable function that takes in our state, which in this case is a transaction. And out of this, we render a header image, as you see on the right. We render a heading and all the other details. Actually, talking about details, we have another composable function that we define that actually lays out the specific detail lines. And as mentioned earlier, your functions take state and expose events or interaction handlers. So in this case, we are exposing a click action on the detail lines. And the way to set that is using a modifier, as you can see here. And yeah, you might be wondering, if you haven't tried this out, what you see on the right is a preview of this code that you see on the left. And this actually allows you to get very fast feedback loop, so you can see as you modify things. Let's say we change this up, and as you can see, it is already refreshed on the right there. So you get a very quick feedback loop, and I think this is quite nice. Right, so moving out of Android Studio now, let's go back. Okay, so let me just present this again. Okay, so what were the pros in the process? I mean, everything is in Kotlin. I didn't have to actually jump into an XML file for my, I mean, for the screen that we built out. And as we just saw, there is a nifty preview, a debug preview that allows you to actually see changes as you make them. You don't need to actually run an emulator to actually see what you're doing. And as mentioned, recomposition takes care of only rendering the bits that have changed. So there's efficiency. State handling is easy, and another nice thing is support for unidirectional data flow. And as it happens on the Luno app, we actually have this architecture that then enables us to easily adopt Compose when the time comes. And as Maia mentioned, we ran into some really weird build issues. And the other con is that currently there's no support for the downloadable fonts, so you're gonna have to bundle that up with your app. I mean, it's gonna increase its size, but yeah, that's that for now. Okay, so all in all, we actually like it, and we can't wait for it to get stable so that, yeah, we can adopt it in the Luno app. Okay, now what's next? If you are planning to adopt Compose, you have to make sure you're running the correct versions. I mean, get the latest versions of the libraries and also of Android Studio. And if your architecture doesn't support unidirectional data flow, you want to take care of that prior. And then, of course, Compose is built on top of Material Theme. So if you are not using that or it's not up to scratch, you need to fix that up. And yeah, once you have those three items out of the way, and then you can decide on your strategy. Are you gonna implement specific portions of your screen or a full screen at a go? That's all up to you. And then depending on your strategy, convert all the things and test away. Okay, so up for questions if there are any.
I have a question for Nick, if he's still here.
All right, let me pull up Nick again. Yes, there he is. So now he should
I
be
guess we can stop sharing. Yeah. So I've seen some reports for build times. Have you got any data on build time improvements? Because build time is a big thing. I mean, even on the Luno app, it drives us crazy.
Yeah. So I don't have like offhand. There was an interesting article written by, once again, the same person who authored the accompanist library, Chris Baines, on essentially, he did like a full performance test before and after Compose, including build times, but also things like APK size, and so on and so forth. I'll try and find the link.
I think I saw that.
Quickly.
I think it said something about the fact that it was less code, and because it was less code, it was actually more performant. What I couldn't figure out from that article was, I mean, Compose, there's a whole lot of compiler stuff happening because of the annotation, and I wasn't sure if that was going to make it slower. But that's a good article to link. We can link that for people.
Yeah, I've got it here. I think it's called Jetpack Compose before and after. So I'll just put it in the general chat. But yeah, to be honest, like I haven't measured it enough myself. And what also happens, I think, is when you like interop and having views and like all of the other libraries present, like and other annotation process and everything else is like, it obviously adds to that. But I guess once you go full Compose, you can basically get rid of things like appcompat and a bunch of other libraries so that you end up with something fairly slim. What I do know also is that performance is like a key part of this whole beta to stable process. So if it's,
that's good to
guess
hear.
It should only improve. Yeah.
Okay, that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
Cool.
No
There is.
Thanks for the talk. Awesome.
There's one question from Ewald. Looking back, would you have found Android development easier to learn with Compose?
Who are you asking?
All of you. Who started last on their Android journey? Charles, is that you? Are you the most recent Android developer, or I don't know. Why don't you take turns?
Yeah, I mean, my experience so far with Compose, I think it was going to be easier to learn Android if Compose were there when I started.
All right.
I also think like, I think back in those shoes, but what I can say is that, and Maia will remember this, is that a long time ago with GDG Cape Town, we ran these things called these Android study jams, which were like lessons, multi-step classes, in-person classes for people who are brand new to Android development, and I think even programming in general. And I guess if I remember back to that, the key hiccups were, unfortunately, setting up your environment, which is hard to get around. I guess Android Studio is maybe a bit more user-friendly these days, but anyway. But the other parts were like, I guess, that creating that link between XML world, like writing a static XML layout was something that they could grasp, but then, creating the link between XML and Java and trying to explain all of the underlying nooks and crannies of the toolkit of like, oh yes, you need to use find view by ID, or oh yes, you need to use set content view here, or oh wait, you're in a fragment now. Like all of that, I would hope would be improved. Maybe just the fact that everything's sitting in Kotlin, you don't have to switch paradigms, might help with that.
Yeah, and my take on that is, if you learn object orientation, then you want to put things in objects, right? It's like your brain's mesh to be thinking in objects. Then to shift to something like functional programming is kind of difficult, but if you've done the shift, then Compose is easier. But what I've seen when I speak to people that know nothing about objects, right? It's easy for me to explain a function because I can just say, you want the computer to do something, and that function is the thing that the computer must do. So I find it easier to introduce functional programming to people than object orientation, because object orientation, then it becomes, where are you storing the memory, and what's a method, and why, and what's the instance of an object, and you kind of skip all of that by using the compose functions, because you're just calling functions in each other. So I think it could be easier to teach, maybe.
So I would like to add a counterpoint here. I did Android for a few years and then started to do more Flutter, which has kind of a similar memory model or composition model. And it took me a long time before I stopped missing, oh, why don't I can't just add a frame here or something. So it seems things seem to be a lot easier in Android for a long, long time. So I think it depends on a very personal journey. I think it's too early to say this is a lot easier to learn. It's still a learning curve. But I mean, I certainly see the potential.
It helps that you don't have to jump from XML to Kotlin all the time.
That's true.
And one of the things as part of the pathway is that there's basically a whole section on thinking in Compose. And it's essentially maybe adjusting your expectations or the way that you look at Compose and approach it. Because I guess with Android experience behind your back, you'll come in with sort of expectations that you can do all the things that you did the way before, and maybe some of the like more very, job security-esque Android things. But yeah, it does require a new way of thinking, which is interesting when you start interrupting and switching between those worlds. But anyway.
And thanks for highlighting that aspect. I know there's in the learning path is a very good tutorial exactly on this, and I think it's extremely helpful. I have a question. I see Ewald had another one, but we'll get to that in a second. One thing that scared me a little bit in the last few days when I started to look a little closer at Compose is the very first requirement is you have to use a preview version of Android Studio, which I normally avoid like the plague. What's your experience with that? Are we trading kind of a really cool, easy tool for kind of immature tool sets? Or
no,
are we getting ourselves into new trouble?
The new version of Android Studio has been relatively stable. I've seen worse Canary builds. This one, touch wood, has been okay. I don't know what your take is, Charles.
Yeah, I haven't experienced any issues with the Canary versions. I mean, recently. So yeah, it's been fairly smooth sailing. Besides the build errors that we faced, but yeah.
I also assume this is just a matter of a few weeks. Eventually, Android, the new features will be pulled up into Android Studio proper, I assume.
I think what you can also expect is that the Canary part, well, I don't know, nowadays it's called like Arctic Fox and all of that, but the Canary part is, I think, going to be more around the Compose specific features rather than like the things you are relying on for the core parts of your app. So like the preview, auto completion and imports and all the specific Compose things, that's sort of like the little gotchas. I'll probably have some rough edges, but touch wood, I don't think it's going to be too disruptive to your other traditional Android development flow.
All right. Now let's go to Ewald. Ewald, should we pull you on screen? Can you give me an indication in the chat if you want to be called up? Because you seem to have a few questions to us. That's the last one. So I guess that's a no. I don't want to put you on the spot here. So his question is, out of interest, and this is for any of your talking heads, using Compose, have you found yourself creating more ambiguous or polished screens just because it's easier to experiment and try things?
We only built one screen.
And I think your mission was on purpose to experiment.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to keep my experience kind of pure so that I could give a pure representation of what it's like to do the transition in a talk like this. So I didn't really go on a whole mission and explore too deeply.
What I can say is that, I mean, obviously it may come across a bit biased, but yes. But I will say from experience is that the one part of Compose that feels, and it's a key part, I think, of adding polish to apps, is that feels a lot easier in Compose is animations. Like we all know the old story of like, there's 100 ways to animate a thing on Android. Is it an object animator? Is it a transition? Is it a this or that? And really using animations in Compose has felt quite a big jump, to the point where you just want to use it because it's like a single line of code, and also has cool built-in defaults. Like the default is that it's based on that physics-based animation, so everything is like looks nice. So I think in that sense, yes, and quite honestly, I think that's maybe a part that's been missing from Android apps in the past, is like compared to like iOS counterparts, is that there's sort of small delightful animations that exist. But I think Compose really does make that quite a bit easier. The rest, of course, is going to come down to personal experience, but just judging by the small amount of code I've had to write to do animation things, I think it's good.
Cool, thank you. Nick, can you also elaborate on the next question about the difference between the Canary or Arctic Fox and the proper release?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just like a alpha, beta, or at least candidate versions of an Android library. There's going to be beta versions of Android Studio, there's going to be stable versions, and there's going to be Canary versions. Canary versions are now use a new naming scheme, and also a new versioning scheme as well. Like I think it's like on 7.0 now. So essentially just gives you the latest features, but just don't expect them to be necessarily fully stable yet. But for Compose, it tends to be requirements.
Cool, thank you. Another question. This means that moving fully to Compose will interpret to Java being depreciated or something. What's your take on this? Actually, that is a very good question. I have that myself. So are we all forced to switch to Kotlin now? I'm still one of these Java people. Who wants to take it? Nick first.
Like,
I'm afraid I know the answer.
like I can beat around the bush, but the main point is that like I think it's going to become increasingly hard to ignore Kotlin as an Android developer. Compose, you can only use Kotlin. You may notice that a bunch more Jetpack libraries are being written in Kotlin first, something like Paging 3, and then they offer backport functionality for Java. But if your whole UI layer is written in Kotlin, then maybe it's an indication. Like Java's always going to be around. You're not going to rewrite the entire Android framework and SDK in Kotlin, but for your application code, I would say it's heading that way.
Maia, I know I don't even need to ask you. I know your opinion on Kotlin.
So the thing is, just use Kotlin for a while and then go use Java again, and then come talk to me.
Charles, do you have anything to
I
add?
won't make you make up your mind, but I'm just suggesting that's a path.
Yeah, I've done what Maia just suggested, and I don't feel like going back to Java.
I see. I get the hint. All right, we had that one. More questions coming in. That's awesome. Keep it coming. For animations, Compose versus motion layout.
I'll probably speak to this, but I think the developers of constraint layout have said this publicly quite a bit, but that they plan to bring motion layout in a similar DSL, Kotlin DSL-like way to Compose, not currently available. But I think the story there is sort of like, as with, constraint layout was sort of introduced as a new way to build your layouts, but also as a way to solve the problem of like flattening the UI hierarchy. Motion layout was introduced to like essentially try and provide a bit of a single API surface for animations in Android, given that it was so complicated and not always easy. So again, on that front, like Compose is very easy, like with the Compose animation library to do stuff. So I think if I were to give advice, I'd say try out the Compose animation library first. And if you're still missing things that you can't do there, then look out for motion layout. I don't know when or how it will be delivered. I just know that it's on the cards. But yeah, two different tools for different toolkits, if that makes sense. Yeah.
All right. I'm just looking at the general chat to see if we missed anything. But it seems that if anybody still wants to come on stage and ask or participate in the conversation, please raise a hand and I'll pull you up. But otherwise, if there's nothing else, I'd very much like to thank you, all three of you. I know Nick and Maia have been very frequent speakers here, so I always know what to expect from you. But Charles, specific thank you to you as well. I hope we see you again. This is really awesome. You did a fantastic job.
Thanks.
And I learned a lot. I feel a bit, I watched Flutter Engage last night, and today you're telling me all these new things about Jetpack Compose again, and now I feel like a donkey between the two haystacks. And there's a third one with the Kotlin project. So I'm not sure which one I'll pick over the weekend, but it will be one of them. And thanks so much for coming here. I think, Nick, you're on leave at the moment and spends your vacation with us. So super cool. Thank you very, very much. And yeah, thanks for inspiring us.
Yeah, thank you for organizing, of course, all the organizing work that goes on in the background. And thanks for leading that, Sylvia and Maia as well. And yeah, Charles, awesome. I don't think I've heard you speak before, but you're definitely a natural. So thank you.
Oh, thanks.
I can agree to that very much. Awesome. So I'll stop the recording now, and might have a follow-up. If any of you has follow-up questions, tweet them or send them through on Slack.za, and we'll handle them. All right. Goodbye and good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.